Shalom, everyone. I'm probably going to be on and off because I'm having some weather issues here. It's the weather has been kind of rough here lately, so I might pop in and out. Um, so.
Weather. That's no excuse, Frank.
Well, if I was in your house, we would have a problem.
I know.
If I was in Florida, it would be great. Shalom, Nathaniel.
It's better in California. Probably the heater for the first time in 5 weeks, yes. No, I'm not sure. This is actually not my gig, so
This is Reuben and Hermine tonight, so I was actually hoping we could get started in a few minutes. If not, like now. Oh, we're live.
we're live.
Oh no! Don't this. So we're doing the Book of Esther tonight, right? And I don't know. Can we get through the whole thing, you guys think, or just take whatever we can and keep moving? There's 10 chapters, so it's fairly short for a book, anyway. Well, let's get the backstory in the book while we're deciding how long it should go. Who do we meet here, and what are some of the main stories? Anyone want to chime in?
I know very little about Esther. I am an empty vessel at this point.
Well, why is it so important to the Jewish faith?
Well, she was a prophet, I believe.
She was a princess.
A princess?
No, actually, she became the queen of Persia, and some guy there, Haman, tried to wipe out the Jewish people that lived there, and she stepped up and made sure that didn't happen.
Fantastic. Well, for anybody who's watching, for anybody in the group who wants to follow along, I just read from online, but I'm hoping some people volunteer to read. Here's the link for online.
If I may add, what I understand about the scroll, or really about the events, is how would you say, a very dark time in Jewish history, at least by the time Haman came on the scene. Paras, that is Persia, they had taken over the Babylonian, they swallowed the Babylonian Empire. You recall, Babylonian Empire took over what remained of Yehudah, the remaining tribes, Yehudah, Levi, and the Binyamin. They took the best of their scholars to be a part of the court of Bavel. But then Persia started to grow as an empire and took over them, and Jews became a part of the Persian Empire. And then when Haman, or rather there was a decree that was issued, essentially that would compromise Jewish loyalty to Torah and to Hashem. It really put their faith on the line, like I guess maybe no other time previously, certainly in exile. And it was through a series of events, it would seem like it's happenstance. I'll give one spoiler, and that is the name of God, that God is not mentioned anywhere in the scroll, not once. And the idea is, and it's not something I came on my own, it's just known that even when we do not see God at work, He is still at work, as will be seen through the series of events that turn in the favor of the Jewish people. In its own way, for the benefit of the world, that Jews are still here with us.
Right. All right.
Yeah.
Well, Abby has said in the conversation here on Side Chat that the only way to know what it's about, or the surefire way, is to actually read it. So does you really want to read? Or should I just start us off? All right.
Thanks, Abby.
But all right, I'll go ahead and start off in Esther 1. Now it came to pass in the days of, oh no, all these names, Ahasuerus. This is Ahasuerus who reigned from India even unto Ethiopia, over 107 and 20 provinces. That in those days when the king Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan the castle, in the 3rd year of his reign he made a feast unto all the princes and his servants, the army of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes of the provinces being before him. When he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty many days, even 180 days. And when these days were fulfilled, the king made a feast unto all the people that were present in Shushan the castle, both great and small, 7 days, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were hanging of white, fine cotton, and blue, bordered with cords of fine linen and purple, upon silver rods and pillars of marble. The couches were of gold and silver, upon a pavement of green and white, and shell and onyx marble. And they gave them drink in vessels of gold, the vessels being diverse from one another, and royal wine in abundance, according to the bounty of the king. And the drinking was according to the law. None did compel, for so the king had appointed to all the officers of his house, that they should do according to every man's pleasure. Also, Vashti, the queen, made a feast for the women in the royal house, which belonged to the king Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehum, Bezetta, Horbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcas, the 7 chamberlains that ministered in the presence of Ahasuerus the king, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal, to show the people and the princes her beauty, for she was fair to look on. But the queen Vashti refused to come to the king's commandment by the chamberlains. Therefore was the king very wroth, and his anger burned in him. Then the king said to the wise men who knew the times, for so was the king's manner toward all that knew law and judgment. And the next unto him was Karshena, Sathar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who saw the king's face and sat the first in the kingdom. What shall we do unto the queen Vashti according to the law? For as much as she hath not done the bidding of the king Ahasuerus by the chamberlains. And Memucan answered before the king and princes, Vashti the queen hath not done wrong to the king only, but also to the princes and to all the peoples that are in the provinces of the king Ahasuerus. For this deed of the queen will come abroad unto all women, to make their husbands contemptible in their eyes, when it will be said, the king Ahasuerus commanded Vashti the queen to be brought in before him, but she came not. And this day will the princesses of Persia and Media, who have heard of the deed of the queen, say the like unto the king's princes. So will there arise enough contempt and wrath. If it please the king, let there go forth a royal commandment from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and Medes, I don't know how to say these names, that it be altered, that Vashti come no more before King Ahasuerus, and that the king give her royal estate unto another that is better than she. And when the king's decree, which he shall make, shall be published throughout all the kingdom, Great though it be, all the wives will give to their husbands honor, both to great and small. And the world pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. For he sent letters into all the king's provinces, into every province according to the writings thereof, and to every people after their language, that every man should bear rule in his own house, and speak according to the language of his people.
Very nice.
Wow.
I guess I'll try chapter. Should I take chapter 2, or do you want to review?
Hey, I gotta.
That's it.
Huh?
This is Jacob.
Yes.
Hello. I haven't been here in a while. Good to see you guys again. By the way. Yeah, this so this chapter is kind of it's basically setting up the backstory. So it's giving us the kind of the intro exposition that we have this king Ahasuerus or Ahasuerus or
Okay, sorry.
various different ways to pronounce it. No, everyone pronounces it differently. He has a crazy name, but it's fitting because he's a crazy king. That's kind of what this is setting up, is that this king is sort of like very flighty and makes all sorts of random decisions and is highly influenced by his advisors. He's basically a complete villain, I would say. He's not necessarily evil, but he's not really a good king at all. He just kind of does whatever his advisors say, and he'll say one thing this day, and then the next day he'll contradict himself, and it kind of all comes to it brings forth the case of Vashti here, where he commands her to come before him, and one of the things that's not obvious, it says, so he commands them to bring Queen Vashti before the king, adorned with the royal crown, to show off to the people and the officials her beauty. So you would say, oh, well, yeah, wearing her crown, that's nice. No, he was saying to bring her before them and have her parade before them in nothing but the royal crown. So he was saying, hey, we're having a party, bring out my most beautiful wife and have her parade before us, completely nude, but with her nice crown on, so I can show her off to my buddies. And she's like, yeah, no. And then, of course, they have her put to death for that. Because they're like, oh, what example would this set for other husbands and other wives? Probably she would have set a good example for other wives, but that's another story. So yeah, this is kind of giving us that backstory about these characters who are pretty central.
All right. Who wants to take on the next chapter? Don't everybody jump at once. James, you've been nominated.
Yes, I've been volunteered. After these things, when the wrath of the king Ahasuerus was appeased, he resembled Vashti. He remembered Vashti and what she had done, and what she decreed against her, and what was decreed against her. Then the king's servants who ministered to him, let fair young virgins be sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather together all the fair young virgins to Shushan, the capital, to the house of the women, to the custody of Hedge and the king's chamberlain, keeper of the women, and let their anointment be given them, and let the girl who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. And the thing pleased the king, and he did so. Now in Shushan, the capital, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Yair, the son of Shimi, the son of Kish, a Benjaminite. Okay, a Benjaminite. Okay, um, of Benjamin, I believe. Yes. Okay, I haven't seen it written like that in a long time. Who have been exiled from Jerusalem with the captivity, which had been carried away into exile when Jeconiah, king of Yehuda, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Bavel, had carried away into exile, and he brought up Hadassah, that is, Esther, the uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. And the girl was fair and beautiful, and when her father and mother were dead, Mordecai took her for his own daughter. It came to pass when the king's commandment and his decree were heard, and when many young girls were gathered together to Shushan the capital, to the custody of Hegai, that Esther was brought also to the king's house, to the custody of Hegai, keeper of the women. And the girl pleased him. She obtained kindness of him, and he speedily gave her anointments, and her appointed rations, and the 7 maids chosen to be given her out of the king's house. And he advanced her and her maids to the best place in the house of the women. Esther had not made known her people for her descent, for Mordecai had charged her that she should not tell. And Mordecai walked every day before the court of the women's house, to know how Esther did, and what should become of her. Now every girl's turn was come to go into King Ahasuerus, after she had been 12 months under the regulations for the women, for so were the days of their anointing, namely 6 months with oil and of myrrh, and 6 months with sweet odors, and with other anointments of the women. This is how the girl would come to the king. Whatever she desired would be given her to take with her out of the house of the women into the king's house. In the evening she would go, and on the morrow she would return to the second house of the women, to custody of Shaashgaz, the king's chamberlain, who kept the concubines. She would come in to the king no more, unless the king delighted in her, and she were called by name.
Wow.
Now when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her for his daughter, was to go in to the king, she requested nothing but what Hegai, the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the women, appointed. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all those who looked upon her. So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal house in the 10th month, which is the month Tevet, in the 7th year of his reign. And the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast for all his princes and his servants, Esther's feast, and he granted a remission of taxes to the provinces, and gave gifts according to the state of the king. And when the virgins were gathered together the second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Esther had not yet known her kindred or her people, as Mordecai had charged her. For Esther carried out the bidding of Mordecai, just as when she was brought up with him. In those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, 2 of the king's chamberlains, Bigtan, and Teresh, of those who kept the door, became disaffected and sought to lay hands on the king Ahasuerus. And the thing became known to Mordecai, who told it to Esther the queen, and Esther reported it to the king in Mordecai's name. And when the inquiry was made of the matter, it was found so that they were both hanged on a tree. And it was written in the book of Chronicles in the presence of the king.
Whoa, let me get this right. He meets this amazing lady, Esther. Wait, who falls in love with her, and that's Mordecai's daughter, who he is basically a not a foster, but a, you know what I mean, adoptive parent towards. But who got hung on the tree at the end?
These two guys, what are their names? Bigthan and
Teresh?
yeah, Teresh, who were basically chamberlains of the king,
Mhm.
and they were plotting to kill King Ahasuerus. So Mordecai overheard their plot
Yeah.
and let Esther know about it, and she told it to the king, and the plot was stopped, basically. And so then these two guys who were plotting to kill the king got hanged.
Yeah.
Of course, it's good to point out, too, that when we say that Ahasuerus met Esther and fell in love with her, he met Esther, the woman he had kidnapped along with hundreds of other women from all throughout the kingdom, and had then basically raped for a year-long rape fest.
Mm.
So it was not like, oh, this was a wonderful love story. This is more of a,
Mine!
yes, I'm going to just go and take all the women I want and hold them captive, and then, they will become my wives because I say so, and that's the way it is.
Mm.
Kings aren't really nice people.
Guess not. Chapter 3. Who wants to read? Please. It's a short one.
Come on, J-Dubs. You can do it.
Me? Okay, I'll read it.
All
There
right.
you go. Take it. Oh, you can have
Chapter.
chapter 4, Andy. How's that?
Oh, yeah, go for it.
But you still got 3, Jacob. We're putting you to work, too.
Oh, wait, I got 3?
You got 3, and we'll let
Okay.
Andy take, and
4.
y'all work it out. I don't care.
Yes, sounds perfect.
All right, here we go. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and elevated him. He set his seat above all the officers who were with him. All the king's servants at the king's gate would bow down and prostrate themselves before Haman, for so had the king commanded concerning him. But Mordecai would not bow down and would not prostrate himself. So the king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you disobey the king's command?" Now it happened when they said this to him, day after day, and he did not heed them, they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's words would prevail. For he had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman himself saw that Mordecai did not bow down and prostrate himself before him, Haman was filled with wrath. However, it seemed contemptible to him to send his hand against Mordecai alone, for they had told him of the people of Mordecai. So Haman sought to destroy all the Jews who were throughout the entire kingdom of Ahasuerus, the people of Mordecai. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, Pur, that is, the lot, was cast in the presence of Haman, from day to day, and from month to month, to the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, "There is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples, in all the provinces of your realm. Their laws are different from every other people's, and they do not observe the king's laws. Therefore it is not befitting the king to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, Let it be recorded that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 silver talents into the hands of those who perform the duties, for deposit in the king's treasuries. So the king removed his signet ring from his hand, and gave it to Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, enemy of the Jews. Then the king said to Haman, The silver is given to you, the people also, to do with as you see fit. The king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and everything was written exactly as Haman had dictated, to the king's satraps, to the governors who were over every province, and to the officials of every people, to each province in its own script, and to each people in its own language. It was written in the name of King Ahasuerus, and it was sealed with the king's signet ring. Letters were sent by courier to all the provinces of the king, to destroy, to slay, and to exterminate all the Jews, from young to old, children and women, in one day, on the 13th of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their possessions. Copies of the document were to be promulgated in every province, and be published to all peoples, for them to be prepared for that day. The couriers went forth hurriedly by order of the king, and the edict was distributed in Shushan the capital. The king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Shushan was bewildered.
This is sad. You gonna continue with chapter 4? Andy?
You have been
Oh, wait,
summoned.
can I jump in with an interesting connection?
No,
Yes.
no.
Okay, never mind. So, do you remember from the Torah who Agag was, or from the Tanakh?
Agag.
Agag, king of the Amalekites,
Oh, that's right.
captured by Shaul. So Shaul went out to wage war against the Amalekites and wipe them out. But he failed to do so, and he took Agag, the king, captive. And the oral tradition tells us one of the things he did is that he was like, oh, here's this king just like me. I should have mercy on him. And oh, he's so lonely sitting here alone in jail. I'll bring him a slave girl. And so, Agag, seeing his chance, basically gets with the slave girl and, sires prodigy. And it goes down through the generations until now here we have Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite. So it's telling us this Haman is a descendant of King Agag, king of the Amalekites.
Oh, cool.
So interesting connection.
All right, Andy, you are on.
Mordechai perceived all that was done. Mordechai rent his clothes, and put on sackcloth with ashes, and went out into the midst of the city, and cried with a loud and a bitter cry, and came even before the king's gate, though none might enter the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. And in every province, wherever the king's commandment and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, and fasting, and weeping, and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. So Esther's maids and her chamberlains came and told it to her. Then was the queen exceedingly distressed, and she sent raiment to clothe Mordechai, and to take away his sackcloth from him, but he would not accept it. Then Esther called for Hathach, one of the king's chamberlains, whom he had appointed to attend upon her, and gave a message for Mordechai, to learn what this was and why it was. So Hathach went out to Mordechai, to the broad place of the city, which was before the king's gate. And Mordechai told him of all that had happened to him, and of the sum of the money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for destroying the Jews. Also he gave him a copy of the writing of the decree that was given at Shushan to destroy them, to show it to Esther, and to declare it to her, and to charge her that she should go into the king, to make supplication to him, and to entreat him for her people. And Hathach came and told Esther the words of Mordechai. Again Esther spoke to Hathach, and gave him a message for Mordechai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces do know that whoever, whether man or woman, shall come to the king into the inner court, who is not called, there is one law for him, namely, to put him to death, except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter, that he may live. But I have not been called to come into the king these 30 days. And they told Esther's words to Mordechai. And Mordechai commanded to answer Esther, do not think in your heart that you shall escape in the king's house any more than all the other Jews. For if you do at all remain silent at this time, then shall relief and deliverance arise to the Jews from elsewhere. But you and your father's house shall perish. And who knows whether you are not come to a royal estate for such a time as this? Then Esther bade him return Mordecai this answer. Go gather together all the Jews who are present in Shushan, and fast for me, and neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night and day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so I will go into the king, though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. Now it came to pass on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house, over against the king's house. I'm
Wait, that's
sorry,
the
I
next
went
chapter.
to chapter 5.
I think that's it.
Now this is interesting, because the lesson that Mordecai is teaching her, of all the things that this sage could teach, as he was a part of the Sanhedrin, which around this time, or before, it was during the time of Ezra. Everyone knows the book of Ezra. It is from his court, their court, that the Jewish Siddur came about. All the prayers that people have heard of the Shemona Esrei and the Amidah, and all the blessings, among others. But here, of all the things, he is telling her that, all the wealth that you've been blessed with, and all the luxuries and the safety, that in the end, that's not going to save you. That you're a part of your people, and you're raised to this position to help save them. So that is definitely a lesson to internalize, for all the world, really. Never to stick our heads in the ground when it could be in our hands to save someone.
No mention of God. Well, it's great. I'm learning an epic story that's canonized as Hebrew scripture, really, I guess you could say. It's epic. Now, does it say, did I miss something as to why she asked everyone to fast? And J-Dubs is next, yes, absolutely, Abby.
If I recall, because she's actually breaking the law by going into the king's most inner chamber, when she's not asked. So even she is not above the law, even as queen. So, it's an act of daring here to do that. So,
Why a fast? Why would you ask others to fast upon you? Or fast on, why would, as a queen even, but as a Jew or a Jewess, why the fast? What's the significance of having people fast, or even asking that of them?
Well, here's one thing about fasting. To my understanding, it's different in Judaism than it is in Christianity. At least, I mean, the way I was raised as a Catholic originally, fasting, we just think of not eating, right? Or just deprivation, like for its own sake. But as I understand it, and I don't know, maybe someone else, I don't know, maybe you can correct me, Ruben, that with fasting, the idea is to, how would you say, try to divest yourself of things that might distract from your focus. In this case, they need to focus, or certainly she does, as a Jewess, I would say to look for Hashem's look for His mercy in this. I mean, it's a principle. It's a principle of Torah that God, He grants power to others, even if they are wicked. They're still wicked. They'll be judged for it. But those who are in authority, there is some, how would you say, in a way, because they're there because Hashem puts them there. And that is certainly worth a discussion on its own, because it does not mean that people must obey blindly, because there are many times throughout the Tanakh where we see people do quite the opposite, where obeying blindly would actually be evil. But the point is, to approach the king, all right, she's risking death, so it seems to me everyone is trying to discipline themselves, get themselves focused. It would seem to me in prayer, even though it's not mentioning prayer, or perhaps in other ways. How would you say? Maybe to affect, I don't know, the mood of the court. That perhaps they would be, I don't know, act as a better attendance or whatever, so that the king will be, how would you say, more pliable in some way. Of course, this is all guess, because we only have just a few words, a short comment to work with here. But there's more in Tanakh that's going on than just what the text tells us. In short, I'd say it's more than just simply, it's not just simply starving, but a way of focusing their spiritual strength, to put it shortly. If anyone wants to comment, sorry.
Well, James, if I understand your question, you're asking why fasting? What's the purpose of fasting in general, right?
I just got back here. That's what I was wondering. Why the fast? What good does the fast do? Does it have
fasting. There's some I can't speak for all Christians, but I know when I was being raised as a Christian, I was taught that. Not in these exact words, but basically, you fast because Hashem enjoys your pain and suffer. And it's good. It makes God happy for you to be sad. And that's I'm sure that's not a mainstream view probably, but in Judaism it's very different from that. Fasting is not for God. And a really good example of this is in if you look at the Book of Yonah, where the people in the city of Nineveh fast and repent. And it says God saw their deeds, that they repented, and He forgives them. So He doesn't even pay any attention to their fasting, really. But this is the idea in Judaism, is that fasting is not for God, it's for you. The purpose of fasting is to help bring you to a state where you are emotionally brokenhearted, so that when you pray, so what she's really asking the people to do is not so much to fast, but to pray for the success of what she's about to do, and to fast so that when they pray, they're praying from a place of intense emotional, arousal, And fasting is a method that can be used to get you there.
I would say that that's pretty in line with the Christian notion of fasting as well.
Yeah, and that very well may be.
Well, again, it depends. My experience, again, being raised Catholic, it was something as, how would you say, being more just mournful, or kind of ended up being that way almost for its own sake. Not to go on too much about it, but the way Jacob is explaining it it's a lot clearer. I mean, without comparing to Christianity, the point is, okay, well, what is the Torah view of, what we call fasting? That's the idea.
I would have also used the word maybe vulnerable, possibly. I don't know.
I don't know. Say that again. Sorry.
Like your body, mind, vulnerable. Like open to, and maybe that's not the best word, but anyway, that's all.
Yeah. Okay.
Steps, you ready to start reading chapter 5? I'm not even sure he's still in the room.
I'm here. I'll read chapter 5.
Thank you.
No problem. Now it came to pass on the third day, Esther donned royalty and stood in the inner courtyard of the king's palace, facing the king's palace, while the king was sitting on his royal throne in the royal palace, facing the entrance of the palace. When the king noticed Queen Esther standing in the courtyard, she found favor in his eyes. The king extended to Esther in the gold scepter that was in his hand, and Esther approached and touched the tip of his scepter. The king said to her, "What is it for you, O Queen Esther? For what is your petition? Even if it be until half the kingdom, it shall be granted you. It shall be granted you." Esther said, If it pleases the king, let the king and Hermine come today to the banquet that I had prepared for him. Then the king commanded, "Hasten Hermine to fulfill Esther's words." So that the king and Hermine, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, sorry, came to the banquet that had Esther prepared. The king said to Esther during the wine feast, "What is your request? It shall be granted to you. And what is your petition? Even if it be until half the kingdom, it shall be fulfilled." Esther responded and said, "My request and my petition, if I have found favor in the king's eyes, and if it pleases the king to grant my request and to fulfill my petition, let the king and Hermine come to the banquet that I prepare them, and tomorrow I shall fulfill the king's word." That day Hermine went out in joyful exuberance, but when Hermine noticed Mordecai in the king's gate, and that he did not stand up and did not stir before him, Hermine was filled with wrath at Mordecai. Nonetheless, Hermine restrained himself and went home, and he summoned his friends and his wife Zeresh, his wife Hershish. Hermine recounted to them the glory of his wealth and his many sons, and all the ways in which the king had promoted him and elevated him above the officials and the royal servants. Hermine said, moreover, the Queen Esther brought no one but myself to accompany the king to the banquet that she had prepared, and tomorrow too I am invited by her along with the king. Yet all this is worth nothing to me, as so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. So his wife Zeresh, as well as all his friends, said to him, Let them make a gallows 50 cubits high. In the morning speak to the king and have them hang Mordecai on it. Then accompany the king to the banquet in good spirits. This suggestion pleased Hermine, and he had the gallows made. And that is chapter 5.
All right. I guess we'll start over now. I'll go ahead with chapter 6.
Any comments for chapter 5, though?
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess for me it's just weird because she got her way very quickly after they had wine. Why didn't she just ask for what she's going to ask for? Don't kill my people with wine. Why wait for another banquet?
I would bet she probably knows her husband really well, and that he's a very flighty kind of guy. Unless she really makes a big, like a really, really big drawn out thing about this, he may just like forget by the next day. Maybe. That would be my suspicion anyways.
All right. Does anyone have any questions? Any more thoughts?
Reuven made
It's
a comment.
interesting. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No.
I was going to say it's interesting with Haman, how he's like, he has all this stuff and all this wealth and all this honor, and he's like, if just this one person dishonors me, then all of this is as nothing to me. It's like there's really never enough when it comes to this sort of ambition.
It almost seems like the opposite of, I don't know if anyone's seen the Godfather movie, but it's almost like the guy in the beginning, he goes to, asks a favor from the Godfather, and he's like, you come to me, ask for favors, and you don't even take me out for a cup of coffee first. It's almost like the opposite. It's like she's like throwing this big thing so that she can ask for a favor, like buttering up, maybe. I don't know.
I guess you're right. A little buttering up. All right, I'm going to go ahead and start on chapter 6, unless you wanted to read what Reuven had to say. Will you, J-Dubs?
He said she's throwing him a feast in his honor to show how awesome he is. I don't remember what that was in context to, because the conversation kind of went on.
No, that's fine. On that night could not the king sleep, and he commanded to bring the book of records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's chamberlains, of those that kept the door, who had sought to lay hands on the king Ahasuerus. And the king said, what honor and dignity hast thou done to Mordecai for this? Then said the king's servants and ministered unto him, there's nothing done for him. And the king said, who is in the court? Now Haman was come into the outer court of the king's house to speak unto the king to hang Mordecai on the gallows they had prepared for him. And the king's servants said unto him, behold, Haman standeth in the court. And the king said, let him come in. So Haman came in, and the king said unto him, what shall be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor? Now Haman said in his heart, whom would the king delight to honor besides myself? And Haman said unto the king, for the man whom the king delighteth to honor, let royal apparel be brought which the king useth to wear, and the horse and the king rideth upon, on which head a crown royal is set. And let the apparel and the horse be delivered to the hand of the one of the king's most noble princes, that they may array the man therewith whom the king delighteth to honor, and cause him to ride on horseback through the streets of the city, and proclaim before him, Thus shalt it be done to the man who the king delighteth to honor. Then the king said to Haman, Make haste and take the apparel and the horse, and thou hast said, and do even so to Mordecai the Jew, that sitteth at the king's gate. Let nothing fail of all that thou hast spoken. Then took Haman the apparel and the horse, and arrayed Mordecai, and caused him to ride through the streets of the city, and proclaimed before him, Thus shall it be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor. And Mordecai returned to the king's gate. But Haman hasted to his house, mourning, and having his head covered. And Haman recounted unto Zeresh his wife, and all his friends, everything that had befallen him. Then said his wise men and Zeresh his wife unto him, If Mordecai, before whom thou hast begun to fall, be of the seed of the Jews, thou shalt not prevail against him, but shall surely fall before him. When they were yet talking with him, came the king's chamberlains, and hastened to bring Haman unto the banquet that Esther had prepared. Can someone break that one down? Because I can tell you what I heard in reading. I don't listen as well as when someone else is reading, but so he wanted to do something really bad to Mordecai, but the king had something different in mind, which was and essentially, did I get this right or wrong? Make Mordecai look good around town.
Precisely. Yeah, the king just happened to get up in the middle of the night and was like, "Hey, bring forth one of my books of Chronicles and just read me something randomly from it." So they just crack it open, and it's like, "Oh, here's a story about Mordecai, who saved you from the hand of Bigthana and Teresh, who were going to assassinate you." And so the king goes, "Hey, what did we do to reward Mordecai for this awesome thing he did?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, we didn't do anything. We just were like, yeah, thanks, later." So the king's like, "Oh man, well bring Haman in here. Hey Haman, what should we do to honor someone who did a really great thing for the king?" And Haman's like, "Oh, that must be me. Here's what you should do." And so he's like, "All right, cool, yeah, go do that for Mordecai." And Haman's like, "What?" So it flies around in his face. That's basically what's going on here. So now we start to see the whole the seemingly random set of events that flip everything around in the story. Where they just randomly happen to open the book to this chapter. Yeah.
That's cool. But then why were they, what was this last line? Let's see here, in verse 13, If Mordecai, before whom thou hast begun to fall, be of the seed of the Jews, thou shalt not prevail against him, but shall surely fall before him. Are they saying that if you go up against Mordecai and the Jews, you'll fall?
Yeah, basically. They're Haman's wife and his advisors are seeing the writing on the wall. And they're like, "Man, this thing's going to blow up in your face."
I saw prostration when I heard that. In my head, I saw you will surely bow down. Honestly, I thought of prostration not unlike Joseph.
Just like Haman tried to make everybody prostrate before him. See, measure for measure. I like that.
I don't always get to talk and type. I got a baby I'm feeding here, but I try to chime in.
Should we come back to you? We're going to go into chapter 7 now. You want us to skip you, James?
Yeah, I got a handful of baby in a bottle.
But
she's almost done, though. I can maybe pick up next chapter.
Okay. Nathan, would you mind reading?
Or is there a next chapter? There is no next.
Or Jacob, one of you guys, would you mind reading?
All right, I'll go.
You go let me
It's
read.
another short chapter.
You go let me read the last one.
So the king and Haman came to feast with Queen Esther. The king asked Esther again on the second day at the wine feast, "What is your request, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. And what is your petition? Even if it be until half the kingdom, it shall be fulfilled." So Queen Esther responded and said, "If I have found favor in your eyes, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be granted to me as my request, and my people as my petition. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to be exterminated. Had we been sold as slaves and maidservants, I would have kept quiet, for the adversary is not worthy of the king's damage." Thereupon King Ahasuerus exclaimed and said to Queen Esther, "Who is this? Where is the one who dared to do so?" And Esther said, "A man who is an adversary and an enemy, this wicked Haman." Haman trembled in terror before the king and queen. The king rose in his wrath from the wine feast and went into the palace garden, while Haman remained to beg Queen Esther for his soul, for he saw that evil had been determined against him by the king. When the king returned from the palace garden to the hall of the wine feast, Haman had fallen onto the couch upon which Esther was. So the king exclaimed, "Would he actually assault the queen while I'm in the house?" As soon as the king uttered this, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbonah, one of the chamberlains in attendance before the king, said, "Furthermore, the gallows which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good for the king, is standing in Haman's house. It is 50 cubits high." And the king said, "Hang him on it." So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai, and the king's anger abated.
Wow, why didn't he just fall to his knees and beg for forgiveness?
I guess he got a little carried away and he leapt upon the couch, like grabbing at her, saying, "Please, don't let him kill me."
Right.
Right when the king walked in. Bad timing.
Wow. You're right, they still haven't mentioned God. But it's all, you could look at it as a lot of coincidences leading up. Wow. Poor Haman. Well, there's only 3 chapters left. Um, uh, James, do you want to take this next one? 8?
Yes, ma'am. 2 seconds here. Let me get my light situated. Get the baby situated. On that day, King Ahasuerus gave the house of Haman the Jew's enemy to Esther the queen, and Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told him what he was to her. And the king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. And Esther spoke once more before the king, and fell down at his feet, and besought him with tears to avert the mischief of Haman the Agagite, and his scheme that he had devised against the Jews. Then the king held out the golden scepter towards Esther. So Esther rose and stood before the king, and said, If it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the things seem right before the king, and I be pleased in his eyes, let an order be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who are in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that shall befall my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred? Then the king Ahasuerus said to Esther the queen, and to Mordecai the Jew, Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and him they have hanged upon the gallows, because he would lay his hand upon the Jews. Write also as you please about the Jews in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring, but the writing which is already written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked. Then the king's scribes were called at that time in the 3rd month, that is, the month Sivan, on the 23rd day of the month, and an order was written according to all that Mordecai commanded to the Jews, and to the satraps and the governors and princes of the provinces from Hodu as far as Cush, 127 provinces, to every province according to its writing, and to every people according to their language, and to the Jews according to their writing and according to their language.
Wow. I just love the fact that in our day and age, we could send something out to everybody in like 10 seconds. We don't have to send people running in 127 different directions.
Okay. And he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed it with the king's ring, and sent letters by countries on horseback, riding on the swift horses used in the royal service, bred from the stud mares. By these the king granted the Jews who were in every city to gather themselves together and to stand up for themselves, to destroy, to slay, and to annihilate any armed force of any people or any province that might assault them with their little ones and women, and to plunder their goods on one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, namely on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. The copy of the writing to be given out for a commandment in every province was to be published to all the peoples, and that the Jews should be ready by that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. To the countries who rode on horseback, riding on the swift horses used in the royal service, went out, being hastened and pressured on by the king's commandment. And the decree was given at Shushan the capital. And Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, and with a great crown of gold, and with a wrap of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor, and in every province and in every city, wherever the king's commandment and his decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a holiday. And many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them. That's right. And now she did really good. Now in the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, on the 13th day of the same. That's the next verse. Okay.
That was 8? Or 8 and 9?
I hope that was 8.
Okay.
Or else I get a really misprinted book.
Well done. I guess my only question, and maybe someone can answer this, is why didn't he just put in the decree that other decree is null and void? You are not to touch the Jews.
Here's the interesting part. So the emperor of the Persian Empire here was viewed as a infallible emperor. Therefore, none of his decrees could ever be revoked. So
That explains.
he actually says that in the text here. It says, For an edict which is written in the king's name, like the one that Haman had made, and sealed with the king's signet, may not be revoked. So he couldn't say, oh yeah, cancel that last edict. So instead he had to say, well, we'll let the Jews defend themselves with arms. So I've sent part of my kingdom to go kill the Jews, but now I've commanded that the Jews can defend themselves against those people I sent against them. It's perfect bureaucracy at work.
Wish she would have just said, let anybody that is without sin touch them. You know what I mean? Clarification. Yeah, something so that nobody would even think about it. Oh, well. Who wants to take on the next chapter? There's only a couple. It was Nathaniel? Is that it?
Shall I?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chapter 9 would be fantastic.
9? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Now in the 12th month, that is the month Adar, on the 13th day the same, when the king's commandment and his decree drew near to be put into execution, on the day that the enemies of the Jews hoped to have power over them, though it was turned to the contrary, that the Jews had rule over those who hated them. The Jews gathered themselves together in their cities throughout all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus, to lay hands on such as sought their hurt, and no man could withstand them. For the fear of them fell upon all the peoples, and all the rulers of the provinces, and the satraps, and the governors, and the royal officials supported the Jews, because the fear of Mordecai had fallen upon them. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame went out throughout all the provinces. For the man Mordecai grew greater and greater. Thus the Jews struck all their enemies with a stroke of the sword, and with slaughter and destruction, and did as they pleased to those who hated them. And in Shushan, the capital, the Jews slew and destroyed 500 men, and they also slew Parshandata, Dalphon, Aspata, Parata, Adalia, Aridata, Parmashta, Arisai, Aridai, and Yazatha. Sorry, it's Vayazatha. Vayazatha, sorry. The 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews. But they did not lay their hands on the plunder. On that day, the number of those who were slain in Shushan the capital was brought before the king. And the king said to Esther the queen, the Jews have slain and destroyed 500 men in Shushan the capital, and also the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is your petition? And it shall be granted you. And what more do you request? And it shall be done. Then Esther said, if it please the king, let it be granted to the Jews who are in Shushan to do tomorrow also according to this day's decree, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged upon the gallows. And the king commanded it, so to be done. And the decree was given at Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. For the Jews who were in Shushan gathered themselves together also on the 14th day of the month of Adar, and slew 300 men at Shushan. But they did not lay their hands on the plunder. But the other Jews who were in the king's provinces gathered themselves together, and stood up for themselves, and had rest from their enemies, and slew of their foes 75,000. But they did not lay their hands on the plunder. On the 13th day of the month Adar, of the month of Adar, and on the 14th day of the same they rested, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews who were at Shushan gathered together on the 13th of the month and on the 14th of it. And on the 15th day of the same they rested and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore the Jews of the villages who dwell in the unwalled towns make the 14th day of the month Adar a day of gladness and feasting and holiday, and of sending choice portions to one another. And Mordechai wrote these things and sent letters to all the Jews who were in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus, both near and far, to enjoin upon them that they should keep the 14th day of the month Adar, and the 15th day of the same, year by year, as the days on which the Jews rested from their enemies, and the month which was turned to them from sorrow to joy, and from mourning to holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and joy, and of sending choice portions to one another, and gifts to the poor. And the Jews undertook to do as they had begun, and as Mordechai had written to them, because Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had schemed against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast Pur, that is the lot, to consume them and to destroy them. But when Esther came before the king, he gave orders in writing that his wicked scheme, which he had devised against the Jews, should return upon his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Therefore they called these days Purim, after the name of Pur. Therefore, because of all the words of this letter, and of what they had seen concerning this matter, and what had befallen them, the Jews ordained, and took upon them, and upon their seed, and upon all who joined themselves to them, that they should unfailingly keep these 2 days according to their writing, and according to their appointed time every year, and that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, every family, every province, and every city, and that these days of Purim should not fail from among the Jews, or the memorial of them perish from their seed. Then Esther the queen, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordechai the Jew, wrote with all emphasis to confirm the second letter of Purim. And he sent letters to all the Jews to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, in words of peace and truth, to confirm these days of Purim in their times appointed, according as Mordechai the Jew and Esther the queen had enjoined upon them, and as they had decreed for themselves and for their seed, with regard to the fastings and the order of lamentation. And the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book. So, Pur, interesting. It's about casting lots. In other words, randomness. And we see how everything turned out. I mean, one has to really appreciate here that essentially you have foreigners for whom the tide has turned, that the king himself is allowing otherwise loyal people of his own populace to be slain. Okay, that's what was over 75,000. You really have to think of that, let's say, in a modern context. You know, that'd be kind of like the same thing, let's say, if it was Iran. I mean, sadly, there are still a sizable number of Jews that, who remain in Persia. I don't know how they continue to live there. And many, still just a few remaining, even in Yemen. There read a news item where their exit from Yemen is being blocked. Hashem help them. You'd have to imagine if, I don't think it would come from the Ayatollah Khomeini, okay, but just to put it in a more modern context, if, let's say, a president who was, let's say, more benign, all right, than the previous rulers of Iran, were to do the same, just to say to the Jews there, well, I cannot overturn my own decree. Why? Because I'm the king. So you know what? You can kill them too. And would have no problem with it, because this one particular Jewish official had been granted such favor in the eyes of the ruler. I mean, to really think about that, a foreigner, not unlike Yosef, who was raised to the position of viceroy because of his Not because of their talents, but the idea is that Hashem was with them. Now these people, okay, Haman and his kind, poor. They're thinking, okay, lots, like randomness. That's how they're seeing things. And yet, we see through all this that Hashem really caused these events to turn around, as if to say, it's almost like a play on words, like, oh, the day is called like the day of randomness, when really it is not.
Now, it's important to point out, too, because someone might read this and think, oh, so the Jews just picked up swords and ran around and killed 75,000 people? That's horrible. But that's not what was happening here. They organized themselves with weapons to defend themselves against the people that were coming to kill them. So, like, the 75,000 people that they killed, that was 75,000 people who had basically picked up arms and were like, let's go kill the Jews, and actually went to kill them. So they were defending themselves. They weren't just running around randomly slaughtering other Persians.
And it noted each time they did not take plunder.
Right, even though they had been commanded by the king that they could take the plunder. So they could, if anyone who came against them that they killed, they could like go to their house and take their stuff. But they said no, that wouldn't be appropriate, and they didn't do that.
Well, Reuven, you do make a good point. Actually, I don't know if those other citizens, if they were non, how would you say, people of other nations who were just simply Persian subjects, or if they were a mix. Still, it's a really odd thing to do, because in a way, it's almost like, a king is allowing a civil war to take place, so to speak. That I would still point that out. It's still an odd thing to do, because the last thing any ruler needs, any state needs, is civil disorder of any kind, presumably. Unless, who knows, maybe there's something in oral tradition relating about these other people of the kingdom who were going to slaughter the Jews. Maybe there's something about them that the king himself really did not really need. So it would not be a loss to him. Or maybe he really was just that dim. Who knows? Yeah, I can see that. The nature of Persian affairs, you say. Family feuds, ethnic feuds, and so on. They were not. And that could be true, as you're pointing out, that these Persian subjects could have been native Babylonians, so that maybe the Persian court would not really care about them. I don't know. Interesting. But, Baruch Hashem, truly, Israel was saved.
Although if we do the math, if there were 75,000 people killed, it said, and there's 128 provinces in Persia, that would only be about 585 people per province.
Yeah, it's not a...
It actually rose up. So it wasn't like tens of thousands in every other province. It was only about like 500 people. Still, that's a lot, but, math.
Yes, that is a good question, Reuven. Why did Esther not ask for independence, as would be granted them later under Koresh?
You mean Koresh, her son? Ah, it's true.
I think she has more power in her current position.
It could be a number of things. Maybe they still, for some reason, because hey, it's There are Jews who prefer to not return to Israel. But you would think after that kind of harrowing experience, it would be a big sign to return to Eretz Israel. Or maybe that's as far as the favors could be taken. I don't know. But how would you say it was that you could say the miracle was added to? Yes, was added to under the decree of Koresh. Yeah, as you're saying, Abby, maybe she felt they were safe enough now that Haman was dealt with. I don't know. But there was a time later, when was this? I'm trying to remember. Because, this is where, this is all tied also with the books of Nehemiah, and Ezra, because those books describe the time of return when many of the Jews, not all the Jews from Babel and Paras, from Babylonia and Persia, came with them. Just like many of the Jews in Yemen who had fled there during the destruction of the first temple, they did not return. I don't know. But this is worth noting for our time, to get political about it, and why not? This is a very political scroll. When many of the leaders of the world in our time, they choose to focus their attention on Israel to the exclusion of other truly tyrannical regimes, right? And of course, it's no accident that one president wants to make deals with the same nation that talks about destroying the Jews. So there you have it. The point is, I'm thinking that we, the nations, have a choice how to relate to God's people. It's a way of how we choose to relate to God, I think. I'm sorry, I'm commenting too much. Someone needs to read chapter 10. Sorry.
It's quick. I'll get it out real quick. King Lazarus levied a tax on the mainland and the islands of the sea, and all his mighty and powerful acts, and the account of his greatness of Mordecai, whom the king had promoted, and recorded in the books of Chronicles and the kings of Media and Persia. For Mordecai the Jew was victorious, and King Ahasuerus was the great man among the Jews who found favor with the multitudes of his brethren, who sought the good of his people and spoke for the welfare of all his seed. And that's it. One paragraph. Continue, Andy.
Oh, okay. Well, only that, yeah. Right. What was it? PM Netanyahu, he gave his speech before Congress, and yeah, it's a mix of both. I think a moment of truth as well as just plain grandstanding politics on both sides. I mean, that's not to be forgotten, but there is also something really significant going on, Yeah, no accident that coincides with this time. Anyone else care to comment?
I'm sorry, I had to refresh. I use Firefox and it starts freaking out once in a while. That was pretty good. That was well done, guys.
It was a great story.
I always like that this story is, it really shows the, I guess, hidden hand of Hashem at work in things,
Mm-hmm.
much like we see in more ordinary life. There's not all these like giant, flashy miracles going on left and right, but it's like just subtle, seemingly random things that occur,
Mm-hmm.
and you can see the hand of Hashem at work.
It says here we were supposed to say a blessing before we read. Oops.
Well, that's if you're actually like reading the scroll of Esther, like the actual, like scroll written on parchment in the synagogue.
Appreciate you hosting it, Reuven and Hermine. Good hangout.
Yeah, sorry. There's just not much more to say, I guess. I have to get on a flight early tomorrow morning, so I'm going to call it a quits. I really, really appreciate it and hope we can do more of these.
No problem. And that being said, every Thursday we do host, Reuven does Noah's Nest, a weekly Parsha reading. So those who want to join in on that, always free to, we have spots open. Welcome to come in, hang out. It's a hangout geared towards Noahides in particular. But anyone's welcome to come.